Hello, welcome to the Cinema Savvy Movie Podcast, a channel for film reviews, discussions and everything in between. I'm Chris Garner, joined by my co-host Tate in the Hour, and on today's show we'll be counting down our top 5 horror films of all time. It's been a while since we've done a top 10 list on the channel. I think it was probably top 10 comedies with George, and that's months ago, so I know it's a little bit past Halloween, so we might be a bit late to the party on this one, but we wanted to get something up around this time to go through these, and we haven't really talked about horror movies much on the channel. So before we get into it, I think we should say what our thoughts on like the horror genre is, and I know Tate, you have some quite strong opinions on it if you want to go into it.
I feel like the horror genre is almost a relic now. I mean, I can't remember anything really coming to the party which is new recently, which somebody hasn't already done before. And I know that people can use this excuse for every genre, but I may be slightly biased because I'm not the biggest fan of the horror genre. But I think that the horror genre is dying. I don't think that there's been a single standout good horror film as of recent times. I mean, if you look on Google for the best horror films of all time, all of them are in the past.
Yeah.
Like, all of them are at least 20 years old, with a couple thrown in from recent years because the hype's still there for them. But they're not that good of a film. It's difficult, but I think that horror genre can't survive on its own. I feel like with most horror films you have to have something going along with it to make it good. For example, horror sci-fi, or it has to be horror action, has to be gore, has to be anything really.
And then when I think about it, most of the ones I enjoy are the sort of psychological thriller ones, which obviously do have horror elements, but I'll completely agree with you there that modern horror is dying, and in all honesty, it's very few and far between that I'll actually see a modern horror film that I'll actually enjoy. Like, if I think back to probably the last 5 years, maybe, I can think of about 3, and, you know, that's really not a lot. So it is mostly the old classics, and to be honest, with the exception of one on my list, they are probably all the older horror films that feature on my list today. So
strangely, I've got 2 more modern ones on there.
I think we might have a few of the same ones on this list, especially getting towards the top. But no, this will be an interesting one because obviously we don't know each other's lists, so we'll find out when they're said. This is a top 10 list, but how it's going to work is that we're each going to run down our top 4 first, and then we're going to give honourable mentions, and then we'll give our number 1 pick at the end.
Just before we go into it, I just wanted to say, like, the last film that I went to go see horror-wise in cinema was this year with Guillermo del Toro's latest adventure, which I've completely forgotten out of my head now. What was it?
Crimson Peak.
Crimson Peak.
Yeah.
And I've looked at the reviews of people calling it, oh my god, it's a reinvention of the horror genre, and it was so goddamn boring. There was literally no horror elements in there at all. I didn't get scared once. And I would say it was more of a period drama that has some weird and scary elements to it instead of being a horror film. So, yeah, if that's the best horror film they have to offer this year, then really the horror genre is dying. I
think the only sort of quote-unquote horror films that I've actually seen in the cinema were the first 4 Paranormal Activity movies when they were still a thing. Yeah. I know that the latest one's out now, but it's on its dying legs now, isn't it? Like, they've milked the franchise dry. I don't actually think I've been to see anything else, which just goes to show that there's really nothing that comes out that really take my fancy. But we'll get into the lists now anyway, so do you want to give your number 5 pick first, Tate?
Yeah, sure.
We'll go
number
from there.
5 is a horror comedy film.
Okay,
now,
it still counts.
I had the choice between 2 here, and initially I thought, do you know what, I'll go for Evil Dead 2 because I love that film.
Yes.
But in the end, I went for Shaun of the Dead.
Oh, okay. I've seen this film once, quite recently actually, on the channel. I mean, George used to be a big fan of the Cornetto trilogy, and I felt really bad that I hadn't actually seen any of them. I think it was for our review of Hot Fuzz. So I know that they don't all follow on, but I wanted to watch them in order of release, so I watched Shaun of the Dead first. Yeah, so go into it a bit more why you wanted to pick that one more than Evil Dead 2, for example.
So with Evil Dead 2, it's brilliant. You can quote it, and I love the action in it. I feel like it's done a really good job, and I believe it's coming back as a TV series because it's so loved.
Yeah, it premiered Halloween night
There you go.
in the US, yeah.
However, Shaun of the Dead just is special. It really is, because even though you're in the zombie apocalypse and it's absolutely mental, zombies everywhere, it's so funny. And it's just, that horror theme's running through, and there are some moments where you're like, oh god, how are they going to get out of this? They're just going to get eaten by zombies. But it's just, you can't stop laughing through it.
And it does have moments of heart in it as well, like especially, spoiler alert, the bit where his mum gets bitten in the bar at the end, and then it goes right back to comedy from there. I will be honest, I'm not as big as fan of it as many other people seem to be. I know it's got like pretty much universal acclaim, like everyone loves that film. If we go in with like zombie comedy films, I think I personally prefer Zombieland, but I think that's just a case that Zombieland is more my style of comedy, but I'm not gonna discredit Shaun of the Dead at all, because it is still a great comedy film. And Hot Fuzz, I haven't actually seen I always keep forgetting it, The World's End. I haven't seen that one yet, but I need to get round to that because I really did enjoy Hot Fuzz. But yeah, it's a great number 5 pick. My number 5 pick is very, very different to your style of pick, and it's probably the oldest film on my list. It is Alfred Hitchcock's 1960s film, Psycho. I love this film, and like I was saying yesterday, like about Kill Bill, I watched this film when I was really, really young and probably shouldn't have seen this film. And I believe that I even saw Psycho 2, 3, and Psycho the Beginning as well, like one after the other. I love this movie, and if you're going to sort of like track horror back, I mean, I know it's not the first horror film of all time. That'd probably go to like Nosferatu or something from the 20s, but this one to me was the birth of like almost modern horror. Like, you just remember, everyone talks about it, but the shower scene, like with that soundtrack, and the soundtrack still holds up in this film. And with older films as well, I'm not going to like discredit them at all, but to me, older films are very hard to get into because, the filming style is very different. The acting, especially, it's always very theatrical and doesn't seem very naturalistic. But in all honesty, Anthony Perkins' performance in this as Norman Bates, it could still hold up to anyone's performance from today. He's absolutely brilliant in this film. It's just a classic film. I'd recommend anyone seeing it. And when we talked about in our Nightcrawler review, the bit where he's in the interrogation room at the end and he stares up at the camera, that scene, we both agreed on that, was definitely based off this, or was at least homage in it. And the end scene of this film is chilling. So for that reason,
personally
Psycho.
would have put a different Hitchcock film in there.
Okay, would this have been The Birds?
Yes, it would have been. I feel like, personally, I like Psycho. It's a brilliant horror film. But I would have personally put The Birds up there more because I think Psycho as a thriller, and I think of The Birds as a horror film. If they were both released today, Psycho would be a thriller film, and The Birds would still be a horror film. So that's probably why I would have switched them around.
It's very difficult, isn't it? Because like thriller and horror so very easily like go hand in hand with each other. I mean, I do think there are horror elements to Psycho, like especially, again, spoiler alert, the bit where she goes into the cellar at the end and finds the dead body in the chair of the mother, the shower scene, and there are some like horror elements where he, when he appears in the same costume as his mum, like stuff like that I think is very much horror, but I agree it probably would go as a thriller nowadays. But anyway, on to your number 4 pick.
My number 4 pick is another modern horror film, the last one on my list. This one is from one of my favourite directors of all time, and it is 28 Days Later.
Okay, Danny Boyle film.
Yeah, another zombie film, in fact.
Yeah, I'm noticing a pattern so far. Yeah, this I haven't actually seen like 28 Weeks Later, or I think that was the only sequel they've done so far,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it
I
was,
know
yeah.
they've rumoured that they're going to do another one. Um,
28 months?
yeah, I think that's what it is actually
Oh,
called.
wow.
But this was Cillian Murphy, if I remember rightly,
Yes.
and Christopher Eccleston's in the movie. Um, Amazing that they got to get London completely deserted for this film, because
Yes.
that is probably my favourite bit of this movie.
I feel like the film in general has a very kind of hush vibe there. I mean, when the zombies come out, it goes completely bonkers mental. And I'd say that it was a really kind of more of a thriller horror. But there was loads of horror elements in there. I mean, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen the film, but when the kid dies,
Yeah.
like, that's just heartbreaking. And it's just a brilliant film. I mean, I love watching not only films with horror elements in it, because I feel like that is what this film is, but just the way it's shot, the way it's directed, the way the zombies are brought across, just the editing and stuff like that, the music especially. Oh my god, one of the best horror soundtracks of all time.
And I believe that soundtrack was reused in Kick-Ass as well, or like segments of it as well.
Partially, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been quite a few years since I saw this film. I want to say that it was the first zombie film that introduced us to fast-moving zombies as well. And as you're saying, like with the editing and stuff like that, the camera is very frantic. I almost want to say, I don't want to say shaky cam, but there's definitely a unique quality to it where it matches the feel of the film. The only bad thing I'll probably say about the film is that I think the theatrical ending is very weak.
Oh yeah, definitely. But
they did an alternate ending, which I'm not sure if it's on the DVD or not, but I think that fits the film a lot more and is a lot more bleaker and starker than the theatrical one.
Even if the ending wasn't up to par, that's only the last 5 minutes. You can't fault a film which has been good for the last hour and a half and then just kind of point to the final 5 minutes and say that could have been better.
I think it's because it is the end scene. That's the scene that tends to stick with you the most, and like if you see it in the cinema or whatever, like that's the final scene that you leave with. So I think that people can be a bit harsher on the endings of films, even if the rest of the film's been good. But that's just personal preference to me. I thought the ending was pretty weak, but other than that, it is a great film.
He wasn't planning to make a sequel, that's why he made it kind of upbeat.
Yeah, absolutely, but unfortunately, we got a sequel, which I've heard isn't that great. My number 4 pick is the only modern-ish horror film I've got on my list, and that is the 2013 horror film The Conjuring.
Okay.
Directed by James Wan. This, if someone says that there are no good horror films from this generation, this always tends to be the first one I point them towards. James Wan directed, as I said, he directed the first Saw film and the Insidious. I think he only directed the first 2 Insidious films, I want to say. But he is shaping up to be one of the best modern horror directors, I would say, because he tends to get it more than anyone else. This film, if there are any jump scares in it, they're earned. I mean, I always hate jump scares just for the sake of it, but if you can create the atmosphere, build tension, and then you drop a jump scare in, I think that the director's earned it if he does that.
Yeah.
And again, with like this film, it doesn't really do anything new. It's pretty much everything you've seen before. Like there's an exorcism scene towards the end of the film. There's doors opening or closing. The things going bump in the night, everything like that. It's nothing new that it's everything we've seen before in previous horror films, but it's just done so well that you kind of get past that and just you're along for the ride with it. And again, like what I can't say about most modern horror films, which I can in this, is that it has a likable cast of characters. The family that are getting haunted, you care about all of them. The mother, the father, and all the daughters they have. And the 2 people they call in who are the paranormal investigators, they're a very believable, likeable couple who want to help these people. And if you like the people involved in the film, then it makes the experience so much more worthwhile because you're sort of with them and want them to get out of it, which is more than I can say for any horror film that I can think of in the recent 10 years.
I can't make comment on this film because I haven't seen it.
I would very recommend you watching it, but again, like you were saying that you're not massively into the horror genre, I don't know if you'd probably like it as much. But I think
I've
it's
heard
definitely
good things
worth
about it.
watching. It's probably one of, as I was saying, like the shining examples of horror from this decade.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty much my number 4 pick. Watch The Conjuring if you haven't seen it.
Yeah. Okay, so this is my number 3 pick then.
Yep, it is. Yep.
This is also another thriller horror film, but this is more psychological. The Shining.
Okay. You might not want to talk about this one as much because this might be featuring later on in my list.
What
But,
a performance!
Yeah.
All I can say is great performances by all the characters.
Yeah.
Brilliant scenes of like images related to horror, and a very creepy and eerie ending.
Definitely. And I kind of almost want to leave it there because
Yeah, I will leave
we
it
will
there.
be talking about this one more in depth later on in my list. My number 3 pick is The Silence of the Lambs. Again, you'd probably class this one as a thriller, and I think probably out of all the ones on my list, that's the one that it's most accurate to. But like as you were just saying with The Shining, like with performances, fantastic performances both from Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins here that completely steal the show. The previous incarnation we saw of Hannibal Lecter was actually in a film called Manhunter, which had Brian Cox as Hannibal Lecter character. Here we get Anthony Hopkins, who is, I want to say, is a lot more theatrical with it, but he is sort of the classic representation, and he is still massively creepy in the film. Everyone refers to the bit where he's behind the glass cell and he's talking to Jodie Foster, and that's fantastic. Their exchanges throughout the film are great, and the story itself as well. It's brilliant. It's Jodie Foster who plays this detective, and she's trying to find and arrest this guy called Buffalo Bill, who is kidnapping women and skinning them to make a suit for himself, which is really, really creepy. And scenes later on are just really uncomfortable. And like The Shining as well, it plays up that really uneasy feeling throughout the entire film, really uncomfortable feeling. But as I was saying, like the things that really steal this film is Anthony Hopkins, who is great. And I've just started watching the new series Hannibal as well. I'm not that far into it, but I haven't actually seen the sequels as well to this film. I know that they followed this up with
Red Dragon?
Red Dragon was the third one. I think the second one was Hannibal. That was directed by Ridley Scott.
Okay.
It recast Jodie Foster with Julianne Moore, and then Red Dragon was the third one, which is actually a prequel to Silence of the Lambs. But yeah, if you haven't seen Silence of the Lambs, it's a fantastic thriller film with horror elements. Definitely give it a watch because it's probably one of the best films of this type of genre I've seen. It's fantastic.
Okay, number 2, Alien.
Okay, yeah, this one isn't on my list, but yeah, go for it, man.
Why isn't it on your list? It's an amazing film.
I prefer Aliens. I'm sorry, I'm one of those guys.
Because Aliens is not a horror film. Alien
I know.
is a horror film.
I know, but it's got Bill Paxton in it, and I love Bill Paxton.
The whole idea behind the original Alien was there is one monster, you're running away from it. You're in a tight, enclosed space, you can't escape it, you've got to outthink it. With Aliens, there's so many, we can just shoot them and kill them immediately. No, in the first film, they have literally no ammunition to play with, they have barely any resources, and that's why it's a better film. Let's move on to actually talking about the film itself now. It is so good. I think it was one of the first horror films that I ever watched. And I remember sat there with my knees tucked up, being held by my hands. I was scared. I was scared that the alien was going to come round into my house and haunt me at night. I love the acting in it. I love the kind of set pieces that they have where they're trying to kind of outsmart it with the scanners and seeing where it is, and I love that scene in particular where the scanner says you should be where it is right now, and then he looks up and he sees it. It's just such a good film, and it is horror. That's what it is. It's a horror sci-fi, better than Aliens as well.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue with you on the fact that which is better, because they are so very different. It's like a case of arguing with a Terminator fan which one's better, Terminator 1 or Terminator 2.
Quick
They
question:
are
which one do you prefer out of those? Quickly, off the case.
Terminator 2.
Yeah, same.
That was the first one I watched, to be honest, and then I went back and watched Terminator 1 afterwards. I think I even watched Terminator 1 after I saw the third one in the cinema. But
Oh God.
no, with Alien, they are very different, and I can understand why Aliens they added more in, because that's just sort of like the natural progression of a horror film, and if you just had one in the second one, then it would pretty much be a repeat of the first one. But no, Ridley Scott at his finest, I would say. Great performances. I love Ian Holm in that film as much as Sigourney Weaver, and John Hurt as well.
He was in it for like 20 minutes.
Yeah, but the chestburster scenes, iconic. I think I even remember hearing that whilst filming that, they actually threw a bucket of pig's blood over the cast, and they didn't know, and that's to get genuine reactions from them. But no, it's a great movie. I definitely need to watch it a few more times. I think I've only seen it once all the way through, and the second time was just sort of bits and pieces. But I definitely need to get back and rewatch that because it's a great film. Now, my number 2 pick, I've got a suspicion might be your number 1 pick.
Oh God.
So I almost don't want to say it and save it, but if in case it is your number 1 pick, then I'll go over it really briefly. It's the 1982 film John Carpenter's The Thing.
Okay, just stop talking.
yeah, we'll leave it at that. We're going to come back to that one. So we'll go into our honourable mentions then now.
I think we've already basically, I've talked about 2 of mine already, so I've got The Birds and Evil Dead 2 as 2 of my honourable mentions.
Oh, okay. We can talk about them a bit more. I haven't actually seen The Birds yet. That's probably the main Hitchcock film that I need to see really quickly. I've seen the clips like where they come down the chimney and they're in the attic and things like that, and it is pretty creepy. Unfortunately, I'm not going to hold this against the film because this is what they could do at the time, but the effects are a bit wonky here and there, especially with like the blue screen and the projection and everything like that.
There have been worse films.
Yeah, Evil Dead 2 I actually watched on Halloween night. I love that movie to death. In fact, I love all 3. The first one is pretty much a straight up horror.
Yeah.
The second one almost, I want to say, retcons the first one in a lot of respects and sort of retells the story. It changes a lot of the facts of what happened from the first one. And that's where you started to get your comedy elements in. And that, to me, is really where Bruce Campbell shines, because he is phenomenal in that film. He is hilarious. The effects are wonky, but you don't care because it's done with that very sort of low budget, tongue-in-cheek attitude that just works, and that's like with the acting and everything like that. But the puppets are great, and it's so quotable as well. It's definitely probably the most quotable one of the 3.
Groovy,
yes. I can't wait to start watching the new TV series because I've saw the trailers for that and it looks amazing. I can't wait.
Then finally, my 3rd mention is 1992 Dracula.
Is this the Gary Oldman one?
Yes.
Francis Ford Coppola. Oh, see, I'm going to be honest, I really, really dislike this film. Gary Oldman was great. He was loving it. He was hammy as hell. He was having a great time. And you know what? I'll defend my boy Keanu Reeves to the very end, but he was terrible in that movie. In fact, his accent in that movie was probably the scariest thing in that film.
Okay, ignore the accent.
I can't. He's the main character.
I liked it.
Yeah.
I love the cast. I loved how the film played out. I'm not sure why you've got a problem with this. Why have you got a problem with this?
I don't know. It just felt really. I don't even want to say low budget, but it just seemed phoned in. Apart from Gary Oldman, like he has the look where he looks like Palpatine from Revenge of the Sith. That was cool. And then when he's in the sort of suit with the glasses on and the cane, that was also kind of badass as well. But when it comes to Dracula, I don't know. Maybe it's Keanu Reeves or the direction. It just seemed really bizarre to me. Like if I think of Dracula, I always think of like Christopher Lee Dracula, or you know what, I'm going to say it because I seem to be the only person who loves this film, Van Helsing with
God,
with Hugh Jackman.
Oh God.
I will defend that movie to the. I love that movie to death. So like a sort of Dracula from that, like or Bela Lugosi, something a lot more traditional. One that doesn't have Keanu Reeves and try to do a British accent, basically. But yeah, no, I'm not. I'm not gonna. That's your pick. That's fine.
Did you
But
say the words Van Helsing in good Dracula films?
I did. I saw that film way too many times in the cinema than I care to mention. I love that film. It's from
Well,
the
we've
direct.
just lost all of our subscribers off that comment.
It's definitely a guilty pleasure movie. I'm not gonna, say it's a great movie in terms of, that respect, but it's fun. You've got werewolves in it. You've got Frankenstein, Dracula, Brides of Dracula, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. It's great. And it's from the directors who did Mummy and Mummy Returns, which are two films I absolutely love as well. But, yeah.
Just stop talking.
I'm going to hang my
stop,
head in
yeah.
shame right now. Shall I just go on to my
Go
three
for
honourable
it.
mentions? Okay. Honourable mentions. I have Evil Dead 1. As I just said about 2, absolutely love 2 to death, even love Army of Darkness as well. Evil Dead 1 is definitely sort of what started it all, obviously being the first one. It was Sam Raimi with a low budget, just making a film like a passion project, just going out, filming it. And as it is the most clearly horror one, that's why I had to, put it above 2 for my honourable mentions. Again, I'll pretty much just echo everything I just said. Bruce Campbell, absolutely brilliant. The puppets, and they even use claymation in this as well, which looks really fakey fake, but I don't care because it's awesome. It's Evil Dead. It's what started it all. After this film, you've had loads of copycat films with cabins in woods, and that's not to say Cabin in the Woods is a copy, because I know that that's a satire and breaks down the horror genre as a whole, which is a great movie in itself. But no, Evil Dead, I love it. It's always sort of a go-to one for Halloween. I saw the remake as well. The only positive thing I can really say about the remake is that for the most part they do still use practical effects, and it's amazing because so many horror films now just go with the easy option of using CGI. The one that comes to mind is probably the remake slash prequel of John Carpenter's The Thing, which came out in 2011. That just looks terrible. Whereas this one, it uses real blood, it uses real props for the most part, and it definitely does have a look of sort of an older horror film. The one bad thing about the remake is that 1, no Bruce Campbell, and 2, all of the characters are unlikable as hell.
Yeah.
I didn't give a crap about any of them. They could have all been killed in the first 5 minutes. I wouldn't have cared. But no, the original Evil Dead, Sam Raimi, is one of my honourable mentions. Other honourable mention is Wes Craven's Nightmare on Elm Street, the original one. We all know that as the sequels went by, and this is often the case with horror movies when they milk the franchise dry, they get a lot more comedic and lose the edge that the first one had. But the first one definitely is a straight up horror film. It does some creative imagery with the nightmare inducing imagery. It is creepy in parts. It is a slasher movie, which I'm not really a massive fan on because they're all very samey to me, but I think that this one does it in a creative enough way. And Robert Englund as well as Freddy is just an absolute classic. Whether he is being comedic or whether he is being straight up terrifying as he is in this film, he's great. And it was also Johnny Depp's first ever movie as well. I love it. And my final honourable mention is David Cronenberg's The Fly. Probably the best performance I've ever seen Jeff Goldblum give, and this is a straight up body horror film. It is grotesque to watch, and we were talking before we hit record about gore in horror films, how it is very unnecessary. If you look at the likes of some of the later Saw sequels or Hostel, for example, they just rely on the gore, and to me that's not horror. That's just, trying to be disgusting, trying to be revolting, to try and spark a reaction from the audience, and that's not horror to me. This one is horror. This is body horror. This is shows Gore as his body is transforming into this horrible, gruesome fly creature, and it is really unpleasant to watch. Like, you're watching and you'll be cringing. Like, there's a bit where his fingernails are peeling off and he peels them off in front of the mirror. It is disgusting to watch, but it's so good, and the practical effects and the costume, the makeup and everything like that is amazing feat of technology and just craft and talent from the the makers. So The Fly is my other honourable mention. Was going to make the cut, but unfortunately didn't quite make it because I definitely prefer my number 1 and number 2 picks, which we're going to talk about.
Do you want to do your number 1 first, seeing as everyone knows what my number 1 is?
And everyone knows what mine is as well, because I haven't talked about it yet. It is Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. This is without a doubt, when someone says, what's your favourite horror film, this is immediately the one I go to. I'm a huge fan of Jack Nicholson in pretty much everything he's ever done. And it's not much of a stretch. It's Jack Nicholson playing Jack Nicholson, but he does that so well. You see this transformation with him in the character, and there's so many scenes to list where he's just steals the show. But if I'm going to list one, probably my favourite is where his wife, Wendy, played by Shelley Duvall, finds the manuscript he's been writing of the All Work and No Play Makes Jack a Dull Boy. And it is edited, but it's almost like a one-shot where he's just slowly stalking her across the entire room and up the staircase, and how they play off each other is fantastic. And I can't remember the total exactly, but I think I heard that Kubrick made Shelley Duvall redo that take about 100 times, or over 100 times. So she was actually physically at breaking point, but that must have been the state he was trying to get her into to get the best performance out of her. Again, without doubt, my favourite Kubrick film as well. I think the direction is absolutely flawless. The imagery is iconic, such as the tricycle scene down the corridors. It's just an amazingly atmospheric film. It really, I mean, the hotel itself is a character as much as the likes of Jack Nicholson or Shelley Duvall. Really uneasy atmosphere throughout the entire film, and to me, that's what good horror is. If it can build tension, build atmosphere with characters we care about or we want to see what happens, then it succeeded. And everything from the hotel itself to the creepy ghosts that haunt the corridors of it to the hedge maze at the end, it all just works, and you really get that sense of isolation, and you're almost sort of slowly breaking down and losing your mind as much as the character of Jack Nicholson is. So my number 1 pick is The Shining.
And my number 1 pick is John Carpenter's The Thing.
Yeah.
Wow. This was such a good film.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not just a horror film. This was such a good film, like The Shining. You'd put those up on a top films of all time list. I'm not sure where you'd put it, but you'd put it on there somewhere, whether it was like 100 or something like that. It would be in there, definitely. But I absolutely love this film. This film is amazingly well done. You don't know who the enemy is.
Yep.
And that's something that the horror genre hasn't exploited yet.
Even on multiple viewings as well. I mean, I watched this the other day. My friend had never seen it, so I rewatched it again. This is probably the 6th or 7th time I've watched it, and every time I watch it, I know it sounds cliche to say, but you do pick up on something new every time, or you're still trying to work out when and where, you know, who the thing is, like when it could have like got a hold of someone, and it's almost like a puzzle you put together as you go throughout the film. It's fantastic.
People are still debating online who is infected at the end.
Yeah.
That's how good the film is. That's
one of my
well
favourite movie endings. Yeah.
Thing is though, this is a remake.
Yeah.
The top film on my list is a remake.
It's a loose remake though, to be honest, isn't it? I would say it's more of a reimagining than a remake itself. It's not like a remake as, say, like the shot-for-shot remake that Psycho had, which was awful. I don't know if you've ever seen that with what's his name?
He's comedy, isn't he?
He's in Dodgeball. Oh my god, I can't remember his name.
Peter LaFleur as his character in Dodgeball. It's cool.
Dodgeball. I'm going to check this now in real time. Vince Vaughn. That's the one. Vince Vaughn. Like, you know you're doing something wrong when you cast Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates. But anyway, back to The Thing. I love this movie, and as well, I'm a huge fan of Kurt Russell. Yeah. And when I heard he's been cast in the new Tarantino movie, I almost lost my mind because he's fantastic. He's still a great talent, and sadly he's not in all that much now. But The Thing as well, one of the shining examples of practical effects, which still hold up in my opinion. The scene that comes to mind is the one where the guy is on the operation table.
Yeah, with the what are they called?
Defibrillators.
Defibrillators, yeah.
And the chest cavity opens up and rips his arms off, and then the head like splits off the body. Or even the bit with the dog as well in the kennels. Because it's practical. You get the sense that it is there, that it is this alien creature, and I believe when this film came out, it really didn't do that well. I don't think it had great reviews at all.
Completely bombed, but it's gained a cult status.
And I think that's a case of most of John Carpenter's films, to be honest, sort of go through that. I know that Big Trouble in Little China did the same. And I'm reading here that it's part of sort of an apocalypse trilogy that he did. I've never seen Prince of Darkness, but In the Mouth of Madness is another great John Carpenter film as well, with Sam Neill. That plays up.
And then he's done possibly one of the most popular Halloween films of all time.
The birth of modern slasher films.
Modern slasher films of Halloween.
Yeah. That's also a great movie as well, but The Thing... In fact, I think if you were going to sort of have like a horror double feature night, I think that The Shining and The Thing would be a great double feature, because both of them have similar themes of paranoia and isolation, and going slowly mad throughout the entire film. So I think that they go really well with each other, both set in the snow as well.
Funnily enough, when you type in John Carpenter and have a look at like what comes up on Google, most of it is to do with The Thing, saying, oh, The Thing, terror takes shape upon John Carpenter's classic horror, The Thing set on survival, 10 remarkable things about The Thing. It is a very popular film with a lot of people. It keeps me guessing now, still. And yeah, do you reckon they both were infected? Either of them were infected?
And this is a huge spoiler alert for anyone that hasn't seen The Thing, so if you haven't, like, turn the review off now, go and see it. It's phenomenal. But you see, this is what I love about it. I love endings like this, open ending. I don't think any of them were infected, and
but they couldn't take that risk.
They couldn't take that risk. I mean, I know they bought out that awful video game, which I think was a PS2 and PC game, which is a continuation of the story, and according to it, Childs was a thing and was killed by MacReady. So if you're going with that, I guess he is, but with this film, I don't think any of them are, and I think it's just sort of a mutual understanding of their situation, and they're just going to sort of, well, we assume that they just sit there until they freeze to death, which is really sort of, you know, bleak ending, but it works completely for the film.
The thing is, we've been following MacReady's character, but we haven't been following Child's character.
No.
Child says he was lost in the storm, but you have no idea whether he's telling the truth or not. And Childs can't tell whether Kurt Russell is telling the truth or not, because he seems to be the only person who's survived.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Childs and MacReady throughout the entire film have that rivalry with each other, which ultimately culminates to that perfect ending. I don't know, because there are moments where we physically don't see Childs for a long time, and that's obviously done on purpose to create doubt in the ending. But to me, like, this ending's right up there with the ending of Inception for open endings. Absolutely love it. I haven't even touched on the soundtrack as well. Ennio Morricone did the soundtrack, and it's a very simple soundtrack. For the most part, it's just sort of one note repeated twice throughout the entire thing, pretty much like the Jaws soundtrack, but it really works. It's atmospheric. It's everything you want from a soundtrack. Great performances from everyone. And as I said, the practical effects are absolutely second to none in this film. If you haven't seen it, watch it immediately. It's amazing. It's probably, well, you know what, it is John Carpenter's best film, without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah.
And although it's not, I wouldn't say it's scary. Like, if I say that this is a horror film, you've got to watch it. I don't think many people will be scared by it, maybe because it's sort of like sci-fi and it's completely, literally out of this world. But what its strength is the sort of like inter-character relationships and the paranoia and the sense of dread it creates. And that's what really steals the show. And that is where the horror comes from, in my opinion. Not so much from the grotesque body horror sort of the alien itself.
No.
But yeah, The Thing, you know what? Like, my number one's The Shining, your number one's The Thing. I'm not going to argue with either
No.
because both of them are absolutely phenomenal. So, yeah, that'll do it for our top 10 countdown of our favourite horror films of all time. Be sure to rate, like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what some of your favourite horror ones are, or some that we may have missed off the list. I mean, I always say this, it's always tough doing these lists because you initially type your list out and then it's a case of rearranging and getting rid of some that perhaps you would have really liked to have seen on the list. I mean, there's plenty of other good horror films as well that we sadly couldn't include.
My top two didn't change, but the other three changed about 4 or 5 times.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I don't want to say this was one of the hardest top 10 lists I've ever had to do because that would probably go to the comedies one because comedy was so broad, whereas horror, it's pretty much, you know, it's either whatever scares you the most or it's whatever's the best put together film out of all of them. But yeah, be sure to comment, let us know some of your favourites. As I say, I know we're a bit late to the party with the whole Halloween thing, but hopefully some people will still comment on this video. Yeah, you can follow us at Facebook at facebook.com/cinemasavvy. We're on Twitter at cinema_savvy, and you can also find us on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/cinema_savvy. Okay, and before we close out on our show, we always end on recommended movie. How recommended movie works is that at the end of our main shows, we take it in turns each week to choose a movie that vaguely ties in to whatever we reviewed in our main show today. So today was obviously our top 10 horror films of all time, and Tate, it is your pick for this week. So which film are you picking, and what are some of the reasons for picking it?
Slightly lied when I said that I've seen only one horror film recently. I completely forgot that I actually seen it, because I thought, do you know what? I love taking the mick out of M. Night Shyamalan. Like, he is such a bad director after Unstoppable and The Sixth Sense that I thought, do you know what? I'm going to go watch his latest film, The Visit. So I guess we'll be reviewing that.
Yeah, this will be an interesting one. I mean, from reviews I've seen so far, you know, people regard this as a return to form for M. Night Shyamalan, as you were just saying. Like, probably some saying it's his best film since his first two came out. So this will be an interesting one to do, and as you were saying, this is a show first. We haven't had an M. Night Shyamalan review or any kind of talk about him really yet. So yeah, I think that as long as it's not The Last Airbender, thank Christ it's not that.
Or Lady in the Water.
Or Lady, yeah. But no, that's a solid pick. So that will be our review on Thursday. And our main show next week, I believe, is a series review of The Hunger Games as well, in anticipation for Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 2. So until then, thank you very much for listening.